Welcome everyone, Costini here with my campaign overview guide for Bay of Canaan, the advisor to Pharaohs. Bay may end up having one of the more limited campaigns in the game. I wouldn't necessarily say it's the hardest. I think Ramesses has that particular claim to fame, but certainly Bay's situation is not necessarily that much better. In fact, it's kind of similar to the situation that Ramesses has, except that Bay does have better units. So let's take a look at his starting situation. He starts with 2 minor settlements, and he does start with a native muster field at tier 2. Now, his initial challenge is going to be dealing with Hazor, who have a minor stone settlement over here. Bay's issue, however, is he starts with food, including if you take Gubla, which also has food. He starts with food, he starts with a bit of stone, but the problem is he has no bronze, he has no gold. And while he can certainly gain it, he's going to have to go to war against multiple factions in order to gain resources that other people may either start with or can get very quickly. Like you look at Ursu's situation. Yes, he doesn't have stone, he doesn't have bronze, but he gets an entire province fairly quickly over here from Damascus. Because what happens is you take Sadat, then you recruit a lot of units and march directly on Damascus, take that quickly enough, and then you have a major fight over Jawa. Once that's done, you have a province over here that has easy access to bronze, stone, wood. In terms of base situation, because the faction that controls Damascus is a separate one and has an army close to it, you're going to have an issue in terms of taking a provincial capital. So you're going to end up being slow. Also, you may want to take Damascus yourself early on in a campaign if you're playing Bay in order to give it to Ursu and either secure a significant cache of resources or a military alliance or both. That is something that is also going to slow you down. So you're going to spend much of your early game struggling to take these settlements, which will in turn give time for these factions down south to strengthen up and make your life miserable. I guess you could ignore Gubla early on and instead go for the Shem province, take the resources there, and then go deal with Gubla. But there's issues with that as well, because Gubla might just decide to declare war on you, which certainly wouldn't be a great situation to deal with. Now, in terms of his faction situation, he does get a couple of buildings that do really help him out. The training fairground, which increases the production of all resources at cost of influence. So it's a bit weird because it's saying production of all resources plus 10% twice. Not sure what that is up with that. Then he gets the singing squares, which give happiness and influence, quite a bit of happiness actually. He then gets Smuggler's Bay, which gives a lot of food and wood, especially during collapse. So one of the advantages in base campaign is he will have a significant amount of food, which he can use to recruit things like Canaanite sellswords and Canaanite shield bearers, which are certainly decent enough early game units. Pretty good level of armor, pretty decent level of damage, though they are lacking in armor piercing. Though those are the native units of Canaan. And then finally, he gets the Chief Scribe Headquarters, which gives legitimacy, influence per non-aggression pact, diplomatic relations, and production of all resources. He's the master diplomat. In terms of commands, his active command, you can use it to immediately apply a new royal decree, but if you wait until Shamsu Hor, your influence in the provinces you control will increase. In the court, you can take plots from other factions, and in terms of titles, your titles provide influence on the campaign map, bonuses to range units in battle, and grant abilities that enable ambushing, such as Vanguard deployment. The units he has are more focused on defense and ambushing than they are on offense. So whereas Irsu has the full combat might of Canaan at his disposal in his specific faction roster, as Bay, you've got more specialized units, things like Canaanite skirmishers, just in general, like the units he's going to get access to, like you look at the faction units, Canaanite ambushers, Canaanite vanguards at tier 3, And you do start with 2 Canaanite Vanguard yourself, which are on the lighter side, but they are wielding axes, so their armor piercing is fairly decent. So my recommendation, take Hot Sword, then decide, or are you going to take Damascus, are you going to take Gubla, or are you going to try and rush for Saka and Shem? Now keep in mind something very important for the Canaanites, is you get legitimacy for every defensive or military alliance. And since you get the diplomatic benefit in this campaign through his special structures, it is easier to establish those kind of agreements in a campaign and gain a significant amount of power and a significant amount of legitimacy in the campaign as a result of that. Looking at the titles that he does get access to, you have things like Army of Deathwatch, which gives plus 50% ammunition, which is a significant benefit. Plus 10% ambush chance and max movement would have minus 25% for ambushes, cunning and battle. You get Arrows of Astarte, which means enemy cannot retreat if attacked, which is, by the way, better than Ursa's benefit, though it does require you to spend more points. You get Keeper of Secrets, that reduces movement at sea and land, but gives you influence. And you get Covet's the Foreign, which reduces influence, but increases your diplomatic relations plus 4 with all faction. So, Bay is the master diplomat in a campaign. He can also get Overseer of Trade to increase your gold income. So there are certainly some significant benefits that he does have in a campaign when it comes to the titles. His unit roster is weak, his starting situation is complicated, but he certainly has his advantages. I would recommend going for the Throne of Egypt if you're going to play a campaign as Bay. And I'm just going to load the campaign here that I played on the default legendary difficulty, turn 34, so slower pace, but certainly able to do quite a few things. Though, keep in mind, you spending a lot of time taking Damascus, then Gubla, is going to slow it down, especially on the default difficulty. So over here, the Civil War is going to end in 5 turns, and I've only got 6 legitimacy. Yeah, I didn't necessarily play that in the best possible way, and Tosret is clearly going to become Pharaoh. But that's because I ended up wasting a significant amount of time to deal with the situation over here, and then I allied Ascalon, then I allied various factions by giving them territory, or even vassalizing some of these factions. This is, by the way, on the default difficulty. So I took some territory, gave it to Ascalon, and got the vassalization agreement in return. Now keep in mind, I'm going bankrupt over here. I'm out of bronze, I'm out of food. I have some gold that I can trade, but yes, there are complications that have certainly been created in this campaign. And since it's turn 34, the Sea Peoples have decided to invade over here. If the Civil War had lasted longer, this is a fairly short Civil War, all things considered, because it seems like only a handful of factions join. Like, typically speaking, a lot more factions would usually join a Civil War like this. It's a rare situation on either the baseline difficulty or on a customized campaign to have a Civil War of this nature. Though keep in mind, with the baseline difficulty, the AI also gets fewer resources. It depends on the start. I probably recommend that, regardless of anything else, having a campaign start with more resources just gives you a lot more potential and makes the campaign map more interesting to deal with. So yeah, I'm not going to get the Civil War done in the first go, but I am hopefully going to be able to deal with Ramesses. Once I deal with that, like if I can do that quickly enough, I might just be able to manage it before the Civil War ends, which would certainly give me a good amount of campaign potential. Because once the Civil War ends, there's a peace, a truce declared, if you will. Now, in terms of Ancient Legacy, I would recommend going for the Merchant, because you do start in a central location where you have access to everyone else. There's not the same kind of benefits that you might get in some other campaigns where you have a lot of bronze available very quickly in your campaign. But there are, like as Amon Mess, for instance, or as Tosret, but there are still certainly benefits to your to the central location you occupy in the campaign map. So you can trade with Egypt, and you can trade with Hatti as well. Now, in terms of the gods, in terms of the local deities, you do start worshipping Vlad. So this gives you happiness and construction cost reduction for shrines. A prayer reduces labor costs for siege, which is useful, so it makes sieges easier. And devoted general gets armor and armor piercing. I haven't built up Vlad that quickly. I'd probably recommend something like Horus to get later on in a campaign, though that might be a bit out of reach. But Horus would give you influence, which you don't necessarily need, but it would give you movement at sea and land, and desert attrition. So that's one of the reasons Horus is so useful. Alternatively, you could also go with Isis if you can get a hold of her. Fa is available pretty quickly. Ra is, of course, available fairly quickly in a campaign, but I think Horus is a really good god to aim for. Of course, there's also the Canaanite gods, which is really what you're looking to worship. You could go with El, which gives you influence, ancillary chance, movement at sea and land, that you could use, and attrition immunity to the desert. So El would be also a really good choice. Keep in mind, default difficulty over here, not customized in terms of what I got. Now, I do need to talk a bit about the faction-specific units over here. So, from the native Canaanite units that you start with are of the stronger variety. So you will be able to recruit sellswords and shield bearers early on, and then you can get swordsmen, and then later on, renowned Canaanite swordsmen and shield bearers. These are, of course, units that aren't necessarily so cheap to recruit in a campaign. Like veteran Canaanite swordsmen do cost a decent amount of bronze, and you just don't have bronze unless you want to go take over Cyprus, which means you're certainly going to lose the initial civil war. You do have Syrian archers and then armored Syrian archers that you do get through the native units. But let's talk about specific units that Bay does have. So in infantry housing, he gets Canaanite tribesmen. I don't think these guys are worth recruiting at all. You get better spearmen otherwise. You do get Canaanite warriors at tier 2, but again, I just don't think really that these guys are worth recruiting as a unit, because they're sword infantry with low armor, low damage, not really great stats. They do have a precursor attack. In the infantry complex at tier 4, things do change, so you get Canaanite spearmen. Decent enough, but there's just better spearmen units. But elite Canaanite vanguard, that is a bit of a different discussion that you can have, because these guys have decent level of armor, and they have a decent level of armor piercing damage. They get the ambusher ability, hold stance, reckless advance, strider, NES vanguard deployment. But then you get the Warband Proving Yard, and this is probably what you may want to go for. Though, maybe not at tier 3, because the only unit that's really worth it here are the Veteran Canaanite Warriors, which you may want to go for in order to get a decent enough melee unit that has a good amount of armor, piercing damage, decent level of armor. Though, you may want to ultimately end up getting the Canaanite Stalkers, which are sword and shield infantry, with ambusher benefit, strider, and shooting while moving, though they obviously don't have a lot of ammunition. Bay also has a bunch of range units available, though he's more focused, like he's focused on javelins and slingers. So he gets Canaanite javelins into Canaanite slingers at tier 4, or tier 3 rather, and then at tier 4 he gets Canaanite ambushers, which are certainly really solid javelins. Not the best armor in the world, but certainly capable of doing a good amount of damage. And then veteran Canaanite slingers with shields, a huge amount of range, decent level of damage, but of course lacking an armor piercing. But you can't go wrong with going into slinger. So Bay's army is a specialized army that's focused on ambushing, though he does have some solid enough melee units. Ursu has the better army. The problem with Ursu's army is these guys, is quite a few of Ursu's specific units, if I can find them, even if he even has any of them. The problem with Ursu's specific units in a campaign is that they will have Reckless Charger, which means that in a battle, they might just break rank and decide to attack the enemy, getting a lot of themselves killed. It seems Ursu has managed to avoid even getting any of them, in this situation, so he doesn't have to deal with that. But that is one of the downsides of Versus roster. Like, it's stronger in terms of stats, but it does have that major downside. Whereas Bay's situation is more... Bay's army roster is far more reliable. Though it is a more complicated situation because of the sieges you have to fight early on, because of the lack of resources you have unless you go out of your way to take them. And even then, when you take them, you're just going to face issues as well. Like, not having a gold mine early on and having to take it, from Megiddo is certainly an issue. I mean, you could technically go for Jawa, maybe beat Ursa to it if you decide to do so, but it is an annoying thing to have to deal with. And also, you're in this complicated situation with Ascalon and other factions that you may really want to wipe out because of the resources they control. Difficult campaign, but still a lot of potential in terms of influence and diplomacy, and even the army roster can get the job done. It's not the best army roster. The Hittites have a better army roster. Ursu has stronger units, but with some issues in that. Base campaign does work, but it's just more of a slower campaign where you will run out of resources in the same way I did run out of resources over here. Costin signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications, and stay tuned for more.